There are some paint-by-number approaches to match structure which would lead you to believe that an effective heat requires hope. But I want to take that theory and flip it on its head, Canadian Destroyer style, next. I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. Here on my channel, I make videos for fellow professional wrestlers at every single stage of their career. And I do this because when I was just starting out as a professional wrestler, I didn't have a coach to teach me, nor did I have a mentor to guide me. And I think the lack of access to veteran wisdom and knowledge and experience ended up playing a real role in my failure to achieve my ultimate career goal. And I don't want that to happen to you. Today, we're going to look at structural elements. And before we begin, we need to define what exactly a hope spot does. A hope spot is usually inserted into the second act, the heat of a pro wrestling performance. And it is there to show signs of life. It is there to give hope to the audience that the protagonist or hero of the story will prevail. But what it might do is alleviate the tension that is being built up throughout the second act so that the third act feels climactic. And if that's the case, the hope spot is actually counterproductive. The second act of traditional three-act structure storytelling is there to supply rising tension to the drama of the story. In fact, we sometimes call Act 2 the rising tension, or more commonly in pro wrestling, the heat or the steam. But just hearing those terms, I bet you can imagine the second act's function is to escalate the pressure being put upon the protagonist, or in wrestling terms, that's the babyface, the technico, or the blue eye. When we alleviate the tension of Act 2 through a moment of comic relief or via a hope spot, all that heat, all that steam we've been building up simply dissipates. And so the trade-off we are making is this. Yes, we might show signs of life and give hope to the audience that the protagonist is about to mount a comeback, but we might also sacrifice all the tension we just built up. And Act 2 is called the rising tension. It's not called the alleviation of the tension thereof. It's not called let all the heat or steam out of the room. We refer to it as the heat, the steam, the rising tension for a very good reason. This next bit of information is crucial, so listen carefully. Act 2 of a three-act pro wrestling match structure must imperil the babyface character. They must be placed in danger which feels convincing to the audience. And when we fail this objective, when the peril they are faced with is not compelling enough, the audience will fail to make an emotional investment. And Act 2 is our last chance to do that before delivering the climax of the match. And so, when we fail to get the emotional buy-in from the audience, our third act ends up being nothing more than spectacle. It is just a pile of moves arranged in a certain sequence with no underlying emotional gravitas. In that way, it is no different than playing a wrestling video game on your PlayStation. Do you know what I mean by that? When you're playing a pro wrestling video game, the action in the matches is not determined by a story arc or by the wants and needs of a live audience. It is probably informed by button mashing and a set number of moves that were selected in advance by the game's development team. And so, if it ends up telling a satisfying story or delivers any kind of catharsis to the people who are seeing this video game match, it is not by design. In fact, it's by accident. Whereas live professional wrestling being performed in front of an audience will have a narrative skeleton. It will have a type of story structure in its DNA. Remember, being a good professional wrestler means also being a good storyteller. And the vast majority of professional wrestling matches are assembled using three-match structure. So to be adept at the art of professional wrestling, you need to understand the function of each of those thirds. And the second act is there specifically to make the tension rise. It is there to add heat, steam, or pressure to the hero character and imperil them in a convincing way. That's its purpose. So given this, Do all pro wrestling matches need hope spots? No, they don't. If in the second act the audience has already made an emotional investment in the outcome, if they are craving the comeback of the babyface, if they are looking forward to the antagonist, the heel character, getting their comeuppance in the third act, then the purpose of the hope spot is already served and it becomes a non-essential part of the formula. Now, can it be used? Of course it can. But must it be used? No, not under certain conditions. So my advice to you would be, if your match doesn't need a hope spot, leave it out. Guaranteed, plenty of other matches up and down the card will be deploying this exact same narrative tool in their performances. And the more of them the audience sees, the more stale the concept becomes. Keep in mind, wrestling fans are smarter than ever, and they have access to more pro wrestling matches than at any point in history. Longtime consumers of pro wrestling see hope spots coming a mile away. They know that they are rarely, if ever, the finish, and it gets harder and harder to make them bite or react when they are deployed. And if we aren't performing for the sake of making our audience react, what are we doing out there? For those of you out there that are a little more advanced in your mastery of these structural elements, I want to give you just a few ideas to start you brainstorming, or maybe give you an idea to experiment with the next time you're in the ring. Up first, use your hope spot only to pay off something you built in Act 1 and then immediately get cut back off. Up second, use the hope spot only as a segue to change the focus of the peril the babyface is encountering. So before the hope spot, the peril might be focused on the arm of the babyface, but afterwards, seg to a new section of the heat that's all about the rib cage. A wonderful practical example of this is Bret the Hitman Hart against Razor Ramon from Royal Rumble 1993. It pleases me so to have gotten another Razor Ramon reference in. A third one, craft a finish that looks like a hope spot and place it in your structure where a hope spot would be anticipated to catch the audience off guard. Or use the hope spot as part of an EEV. If the violation beat completes the EEV pattern but does not end with the babyface having the upper hand, then it both satisfies the audience while maintaining the dramatic tension of Act 2. And if you've not yet mastered using EEVs in your storytelling, well, I dedicate a lot of time to that in 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer, a book for fellow pro wrestlers, which you can get right now through Amazon as an ebook or a paperback, or I'll read you the audiobook over on audible.com.